WMAR-2 News begins now with breaking news.
For WMAR-2 News, I'm Erin McPherson. We have breaking news out of Annapolis. Governor Larry Hogan is addressing the rise in anti-Asian crimes and violence. Let's take a listen.
I gathered a number of leaders from the Asian American community in Ellicott City as we visited several businesses that were recently vandalized on Lunar New Year. This COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenging time for all of us, but Asian Americans have had to deal with an additional crisis, a sharp and alarming rise of racist rhetoric, vitriol, and harassment directed at them simply because of their race, ethnic background, or national origin. Nearly 1/3 of all Asian Americans say that they've experienced some form of discrimination since the pandemic began. In Maryland, hate crimes targeting Asian Americans have more than doubled since 2018 and rose by 150% nationwide in 2020. That hits close to home for me and my family. Like so many of their fellow Asian Americans, my wife and our 3 daughters have had to contend with some of this throughout their lives. But in recent months, all across the country, we have seen hurtful words and gestures turn into villainization and violent attacks, and many of which have gone unreported and unpunished, including attacks captured on video where witnesses fail to intervene and to help the victims, and social media challenges that actively encourage people to attack Asians. Our Asian American community is facing challenges worse than we've seen in decades. And I've been calling on more leaders across the country to speak out against this threat the way that my wife has. I'm very proud of the First Lady's courage and passion in condemning the attacks against our Asian American community. But as I have been saying for weeks, words are not enough, which is why I immediately directed the Maryland State Police and all of our state law enforcement agencies to increase enhanced visibility patrols and to provide additional protection for members of the Asian community. We issued awareness bulletins in an effort to ensure the safety of Asian-owned businesses against further attacks. And we've been encouraging anyone who is a victim or has witnessed a hate crime to please come forward. All incidents can be reported by calling Maryland's Hate Crimes Hotline at 1-866-481-8361. We've also been pushing law enforcement and prosecutors at every level of government to vigorously investigate all hate crime allegations and to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Today, we're taking further action by announcing the creation of an Asian American Hate Crimes Work Group, which will be composed of a wide-ranging group of experts and advocates across various disciplines who will be tasked with developing strategies, recommendations, and additional actions that can be taken to address this rise in anti-Asian activity, to prevent acts of violence, and to support victims and witnesses. And I'm very pleased to announce today that former U.S. Attorney Robert Hur has agreed to serve as chairman of this work group. In 2018, Rob was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate to serve as the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for the District of Maryland. He spent the past 3 years focusing on cases involving public corruption, national security, and cyber crimes, violent crime and gangs, fraud, and the opioid crisis. Our administration had the opportunity to work very closely with him on a number of important initiatives and to work with him on trying to address violent crime and gun crimes in Baltimore City. Worked with him in providing funding so that they could hire additional prosecutors to investigate and prosecute federal firearms cases in federal court. Rob was widely credited with increasing diversity within the U.S. Attorney's Office and for strengthening relationships with law enforcement and other partners at the local, state, and federal levels. Prior to serving as U.S. Attorney, Rob was the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General with the U.S. Department of Justice, where he assisted with oversight of all components of the department. He also served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Maryland, where he prosecuted crimes including gang violence, firearms offenses, narcotics trafficking. And prior to that, he began his legal career as a law clerk for Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist. Rob is a strong advocate for justice and for the Asian American community. And I want to thank him for all of his many years of service to the state and to the nation. We very much appreciate his willingness to share his significant expertise, knowledge, and leadership by spearheading this important effort. So at this time, I'd like to invite Rob to come up and say some remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Governor, for those very kind words. And good afternoon, everyone. As an Asian American, I am so grateful to Governor Hogan and the First Lady for focusing attention on the important issues of bias and violence against members of the Asian American communities in our nation. And I am very thankful for the opportunity to be part of the solution. Conversations about subjects like race and racism can be extraordinarily awkward and difficult. But awkward and difficult and honest conversations are the only way to solve big and painful problems in our society. I love this country and all the promise that it holds for everyone. And that's why it was such a privilege for me to serve as United States Attorney and work to make our state safer and more just for all Marylanders. There is much in our country's history that we can and should be proud of. There are also many shameful and painful episodes in our nation's history in which people have been persecuted on the basis of what they look like, whom they love, or the faith they practice. And those shameful episodes include the recent and growing number of instances of bias-motivated crimes committed against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Now, the rise in hate-based incidents and crimes against Asian Americans is particularly painful to me, as I have dedicated much of my career to the service of our country. And I am now concerned for my parents' safety and the safety of other members of my family on the basis of their physical appearance. And that is a fear that no one should have to have. That's how I felt as a member of law enforcement, as United States Attorney, and that's how I continue to feel as an American. Thank you. I look forward to doing the work that the Governor has asked me to take on. With that, I'll invite the Governor back.
Thank you very much, Rob. With that, we'd be happy to take some questions.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what the work group and the task force, what kinds of activities will be involved in?
Maybe I'll interrupt this one.
So I'd be happy to address that. What the Governor has in mind, and that I am looking forward to undertaking, is an effort to solicit as many opinions and viewpoints as perspectives on this issue as possible. So we're going to be, we're in process of determining who is going to be on this particular work group, but we're eager to solicit a diverse array of viewpoints. And honestly, I view the task at hand to be thoughtful and invite input. I know that there are many people in the state who have expressed really relief to the Governor and the First Lady in their travels around the state recently talking about this issue. Many people have suffered incidents of hate-based discrimination and violence, and those incidents go underreported. So we want to learn more about that. We want to hear views and perspectives. And in the end, I know the Governor is eager for us to develop a set of recommendations. As he said, it's one thing to raise awareness and to speak out about the issue. It is quite another, and he's eager to receive recommendations for action about what he and other government officials can do to address this problem. Yes, sir.
Is there the thought process you mentioned about reaching out, let's say like local WMAR-TV, for example, is that really one of the goals to do, and also some of the recommendations, what do you think would be able to present something for the government, for the public to see?
Great questions. So we're still working through with the governor and his team about the timeline. That's another issue that we're going to crack down on immediately and get down to figuring out, in addition to the membership of the group. But you put your finger on a very important issue, which is issues facing the Asian American community in the state and the nation. They're not operating in a vacuum. And as you say, you put your finger on one important issue, which is how the Asian American communities are interacting with other communities in the state and in the nation. So that's certainly something that we're going to be mindful of. And again, we want to have thoughtful, candid, potentially awkward discussions about that subject, but that's certainly part of the deliberation that we're planning on engaging in.
Madam First Lady, could you, I don't know if you know the answer, but can you talk about sort of what have the conversations been like with your family in this past few months since what's happened in Georgia and other places?
I mean, I hear from a lot of people, my friends, Robert say that some people is not report. Not only Korean Americans, Chinese American, and other Filipino American, lots of, well, same as me, first generation, they didn't report long time, they not used to report to this thing is, but it's a long history about that. So we try to now, we are same idea. Well, we have to show, this problem is we're going to future, we don't have give the next generation, we don't want to do that. Then also our grandkid generation, same. They are born here, they're third generation, even though some, fourth generation, so same as all Americans, so.
Thank you. We have had these conversations a lot in our family. Our 3 daughters are very concerned about our 4 grandkids, and we've had long conversations. We had a family Zoom with everybody where they were just pouring out, telling all the stories of all the things that happened to them throughout their lives. Our youngest daughter, her best friend's mother was attacked at a gas station, and she was afraid to come visit us with our grandchild, with our granddaughter. And our middle daughter, had a friend that was somebody she went to law school with here that was getting on a plane at BWI as people were making racial slurs at her in front of her kids, talking about the China virus. I mentioned before the First Lady's assistant, who doesn't want to run anymore in Howard County because a car pulled over, scared her to death, cut her off, and started screaming racist slurs at her. Her mother had a similar experience at the grocery store. I mean, these are conversations our daughters saying, much like the former U.S. attorney said, he was worried about his parents, and our kids are worried about their mom. These are conversations that not everybody, I think not everyone was aware of, the kinds of feeling, and Rob touched on it when my wife and I were in Ellicott City visiting the businesses. Like 10 people came up to me and were pouring out their stories of the pretty violent things that were happening to them. One woman that owned one of the restaurants said she was attacked in the front parking lot, and that all of her workers no longer go out the back door, that they all have to leave together because they're afraid. We had somebody else tell us a story about their home being vandalized repeatedly. And, many of these people didn't report crimes. They just felt like they could open up finally. But these, a lot of times, first-generation immigrants, and they weren't sure anybody was going to do anything, and they weren't sure that, how to go about reporting, or they just kind of kept it to themselves. And some of it is a cultural, our kids talk about how they were raised not to try to assimilate and to not make waves and just work hard and don't speak out. And so we're seeing younger people that are having the courage to speak up. And we're hoping that some of these other folks will come forward. And you know, we're hoping that a lot of those people will be able to talk with Rob and his team as they're putting this together.
Governor, based on what you just said and the stories that you've heard as you've gone around Howard County, for example, what kinds of recommendations, what kinds of actions are you hoping to get back from this work group?
Well, you know, we talked about some of the actions we've already taken with respect to all 5 state police agencies and sending out bulletins, working in conjunction with all of our local county police and sheriff's departments, and in coordination with the state police and others. We're going to get input from prosecutors here in the state. Obviously, Rob's experience at the federal level, his knowledge of hate crimes in the Justice Department. You know, we haven't said, here's what we want you to come up with. We're giving him free rein to help put together a really great group of folks. I'm not one for, you know, work groups or commissions or committees or task forces that don't do anything. So I have a predilection for action, like we did with the Equity Task Force, you know, headed up by General Burkhead. They're taking action every single day. They're not just getting input. They are getting input from the community, but then they're acting on it immediately. So I'm hopeful that we can find some recommendations from this group that we can act on right away that can make a difference.
If you're just joining us, Governor Larry Hogan addressing the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes and discrimination. He's talking about the action they're taking instead of just talk. He created the Asian American Hate Crime Work Group, which the chairperson leading that is former U.S. Attorney Robert Hur. And they were talking about what their plans are for this group to hopefully get more people in the community to come forward, whether witnesses or victims of anti-Asian hate crime. We will have much more on this on our website, WMAR2news.com, as well as coming up on WMAR 2 News at 5 o'clock. We'll see you then.